Next, let's look at those regional cultural differences. We saw early on how English settlement created very distinct regions of British colonies. We had New England, we had the Mid Atlantic, we had the Chesapeake, we had the Southern colonies. Some of those differences are going to persist well past the Revolution into the Federalist era, into the antebellum period. And in fact, we should probably broaden our view of what we're talking about when we're talking about America, because we can see regional differences even more pronounced if we expand our definition. For example, we could look to northern New Spain. We could look out to California. And as we know, settled under the Spanish mission system by Spanish conquistadors and encomenderos. You have the mission being built and then surrounded by really large countryside that the mission controlled. The largest in northern New Spain would be Los Angeles at that time, but with only 300 people. Now, a lot of those people were what the Spanish referred to as mestizos, people of mixed heritage. And as a result, the culture reflected that. It's a mixing of Spanish and Indian cultures in places like Los Angeles and throughout the Mission Trail in California. We can also see in New Orleans and St. Louis that impact of French settlement. In New Orleans especially, you have an extremely diverse population with people of French descent, people of West Indian descent. You have blacks, you have whites, you have Native Americans, you have Spanish speakers, you have all kinds of languages and an extremely diverse culture as well. You even have African Americans, free African Americans, or free blacks with basically the same rights as white people as a result of French law. And the French dominated the culture and business in New Orleans and in St. Louis, but you do have diverse language, you have diverse food, you have diverse music in both of these areas. We can even go all the way up to Alaska, which in 1784, we have permanent Russian settlements starting to be built. Now, the most important, most lasting one of these is in Sitka, Alaska, in the southern part of Alaska. It was an important part of Russian fur trading operations. And as a result of intermarriage, we have a number of Russian Creoles, people of Russian and Native American descent that play a key role in that trade, but also in that cultural blend that's found in that area. This is a church still, a picture from Sitka today, and we can see the influence of the Russian Orthodox Church on the architecture still today. We also have some cultural differences in different pockets of America as a result of migration. We're going to look at Cincinnati, Ohio as an example, but it's not the only one because 5 to 10% of every American household moved each year. You've got at least 5% of the country moving every year. And out west, those numbers are even higher. If you look at a 10-year span, a census, 2 out of every 3 households moved every 10 years. And for those people who settled in the West, it resulted in a very communal style of living. Think of your typical frontier fort. If you were south of the Ohio River, that's the type of settlement you probably lived in, at least initially, until Native American threats after 1794 were not as high. Despite that migration west, despite settlements by other European colonies in far reaches of the continent, 50% of the country is still living within 50 miles of the Atlantic Ocean in 1800. And as a result, those Atlantic ports are going to dominate politics, they're going to dominate economics, and as a result, they also dominate American culture. After all, Europe is the cultural center that's still creating the guidelines, I guess, of culture at this time, and it's those coastal cities that are the most connected with Europe. Let's start down south in Charleston, South Carolina, where you have white, black, some slaves, some free, Indian, and people of mixed race all living within the important southern port city of Charleston, South Carolina. And as a result, you have a multitude of languages. You have English, you have Spanish, You have some slave dialects being spoken as well. And Charleston is that social center for the low country aristocracy, those rich, wealthy planters of the Atlantic coast in South Carolina. And as a result, you're going to see maybe a little bit less change to the culture in a place like Charleston, South Carolina. Baltimore, Maryland is going to be a little similar. It's the social center for the Upper South's aristocracy. This is the main port for all that tobacco being grown in Maryland and Virginia and some parts of North Carolina. In both these two areas, in the Chesapeake and in the former southern colonies, now the southern part of the United States, slavery is going to grow in importance and become a bigger part of the culture of those areas, not just the economy. In other parts of the country, it's going to be declining. Parts like Philadelphia, the political and cultural and intellectual center of the nation in this Federalist era. Philadelphia cream cheese is not called Philadelphia cream cheese because it was created in Philadelphia. It was called Philadelphia cream cheese. It was created in New York, but they called it Philadelphia because Philadelphia was the most cosmopolitan, the most fancy, the most cultured city in America at the time. Remember, we saw Peale's Museum. I don't think it's a coincidence that that was built in Philadelphia. It's also a center for international trade, as all that wheat being farmed by those German immigrants in Pennsylvania, and it's a center for banking as well. New York is going to become the economic hub, however. It's going to be the focus of American trade. New York quickly becomes the link with our most important trade partner, Great Britain. In fact, by 1800, 1/4 of all shipping is owned by New York merchants. And as a result, industries that go along with shipping, like banking and insurance, are located in New York as well. Boston is an important port still for fishing, but it's also going to add shipbuilding and banking and insurance to its economic portfolio. And it's in Boston and the surrounding New England area, like especially Salem, where we're really going to see that federal style of architecture take hold.